Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Allison Anderson, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the SMCP webinar series. Before I get started, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items about the series. I will be your host throughout this series, and we will be joined by 14 professionals that are industry experts in their field. Each webinar will be 30 minutes in length and will be recorded for your convenience, and you can watch them online until December 31st, 2017. If you'd like to join the conversation, please tweet at us at @XXNM, #SMCP. So that you understand why I'm so passionate about succession planning, I'd like to share a little bit of my history. In 2011, I was working as an economic development officer with Community Futures in Moose Jaw, and I had a client that was looking to retire and sell their plumbing business. The problem with this industry is when you put up a for sale sign, your suppliers and the customers get nervous. Your suppliers start asking for cash on delivery, which screws up your cash flow, and your customers don't want to buy a water heater from someone who won't be around to service the warranty in 5 years. I had looked into options for my client to list their business, online posting boards, brokers, and classified ads, and none of these options gave them the privacy they needed to sell their business in a cost-effective manner. That is when I started SuccessionMatching.com. Over the past number of years, Succession Matching has worked with thousands of business owners on their business transition and succession planning needs. The information that I'm sharing with you today comes from one-on-one interactions with our members, our speaking tour, and the data from the back end of our website. Some of the learning objectives that we're going to go over today are explain the current market conditions for business transitions in Canada, understand the 5 phases of business transitions, outline next steps in your own succession plan, identify who should be involved in the process, and what resources are available. At the end of the webinar series, you will also be able to design a succession plan for your business or farm. Before we get into a market snapshot, I want you to take a few minutes to think about this question. In your opinion, what is the biggest problem facing the Canadian economy today? I'm going to share with you some of the information that I thought of, and for the main reason that we're here today. This will not come as a surprise to anyone, but for the first time in Canada, we have more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 15. The average small business owner has 90% of their wealth tied up in the business. Given the population, how many business and farm owners are now looking at transitioning in Canada? $1.9 trillion worth of assets. That's more than Canada's GDP. As you can see from the numbers, it's going to get a lot worse. And from the same report, here's a quote. Given this magnitude of an aging population in Canada, a faulty or badly executed succession planning process could have a ripple effect throughout the Canadian economy via reduced productivity, job losses, premature sales, and increased bankruptcy rates. There is also a recent BDC report done on September 20th of this year, and they found that only 9% of business owners had a formal succession plan. I also had the opportunity to talk to the OFA, who also recently did a survey of their members. And they found that one of the main reasons that the majority of their members did not do a succession plan is because it was too expensive. Why does this scare me? Early on in my career, I was fortunate enough to get a partnership with the largest bank in Canada, RBC, and I did a speaking tour with them. I had the honor of meeting hundreds of business and farm owners and to talk to them about the importance of a proper planning while introducing our website. 2 years later, I had received a phone call from a person who had attended one of these lunches. About 6 months earlier, the business owner was diagnosed with cancer. Chemotherapy was taking the toll on her body, and she quickly became too tired to work. It was a Thursday afternoon, and she wanted to sell the business by Monday. She had a potential buyer in mind, but after spending the weekend in negotiations, they failed to reach an agreement. That Monday morning, she shut down the business. Cindy had told me that she regretted not putting what she'd used that day at the speaking event and to use and not started her succession plan sooner. But day-to-day business demands took priority, and she always thought she had more time. Unfortunately for her, the future arrived early. We see this far too often. As I'd mentioned before, the BDC reported that only 9% of business owners in Canada have a formal succession plan, despite 70% of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business memberships nearing retirement. There's literally a tsunami of business and farm owners who will need to transition, but not enough transition planning is in place. So who will this affect? Absolutely everyone. A lack of business succession planning leads to poor business retention, resulting in job loss and tax loss, economic decline, and the elimination of valuable Main Street services. What will happen to your community when 70% of the businesses decide to close on Monday? And that's why we're here today. Succession Matching has developed a community project, and we have partnered with a number of private and public organizations for a 3-year boots-on-the-ground approach to business transition and succession planning. I'd like to take the time to thank our community partners and our sponsors. Without your participation, none of this would be possible. When business owners are looking to sell their businesses, there are 3 questions that are commonly asked, and I'm going to walk you through them one by one. When should I start planning? Who should be involved? And where do I start? In technical terms, a business transition is when the business is passed from one owner to another. This can be a family member, employee share ownership plan, or third-party sale at market value. How many of you are interested in doing a family transition? How many of you would like to sell to one or multiple employees? Or how many of you need to find a third-party buyer? Every plan can be unique because of the human factors involved, but all 3 types of business transitions have similar elements. I'd also like to mention that they don't operate independently. For example, a management buyout may engage outside capital to complete the purchase. So where do you start? Here's a really good starting point. We've got a free guide available to business and farm owners for the 5 phases of business transition and succession planning. So I'm going to walk you through that one by one today. Phase 1, getting the business ready to sell. The process can take 12 to 24 months, but I'm going to share some tips and tricks with you today that will help cut down some of that time. The first step in phase 1 is to ensure the books are in order. This will allow you to understand what the transferable value of the business is and why it is that value. Not having the books in order can be the first delay in any succession plan, which makes it extremely difficult to determine a value. Determining a value and understanding this process is critical because it gives you an opportunity to identify the areas that you can improve to maximize your asking price. Your bookkeepers or accountants are beneficial to engage during this phase because they have a background knowledge of you as the owner and the business. We also recommend looking into a chartered business valuator to be engaged at this stage to understand the transferable value of the business and why. By reviewing the valuation, a company should be able to identify areas of improvement, build a go-forward plan, and take action to implement these changes. By doing this exercise early on in the process, the business owner will be able to better ensure the business isn't dependent on one person, which will increase the value and likelihood of a sale. Phase 2, engaging the family or staff member or actively looking for a third party. This process can take 6 to 12 months. And I really can't stress this enough. Communication is key. The first step in phase 2 is communicating with qualified employees, group of employees, or family members to see if they have any interest in taking over the business in the coming years. I once had a client who called Succession Matching in a panic because they had already bought a house in Kelowna and they were ready to pack their bags and move when they called their son and told him to move home from Calgary and take over the family farm. The son had been working and living in Calgary for the past 20 years, and he had no interest in moving his family away and taking over the farm. So really, cannot stress it enough, communication is key. Human resources are also very important during this phase. Oftentimes, our members express concern about engaging their employees for fear that they may go somewhere else. There are a number of strategies that you can use to show them that you're getting a plan in place, but it doesn't mean that you're closing tomorrow. They will be grateful to know that they have an increased job security and can be key to the value of your business. If employees or family members don't express interest, the business owner must then start looking for a third-party buyer. Please join us later on in the webinar series for a great human resource webinar for before, during, and after the transition, and there'll be an HR checklist provided. Phase 3, due diligence. This process can take 1 to 12 months and can be dramatically decreased if you put the time and effort in phase 1 and 2. A few things I'd like to highlight is it's always important to understand what your BATNA is, which means best alternative to negotiated agreement. Outline timelines in writing, outline responsibilities in writing, because remember, good paperwork makes good friends. To determine what your BATNA is, there's a resource that we have on our website for anyone to see from the public-facing site, which is a purchase agreement checklist. I'd recommend going through the list one by one and understanding what you would be okay with in a sale, so that when you get caught up in the emotions of transitioning your business, you don't give away or you don't agree to terms that you won't be able to live with after the transition. The fourth phase is financing. This process can take 1 to 12 months. Depending on the size of the company, tax implications, long-term agreements, and ability to finance the acquisition, financing, the purchase can vary greatly. We work with a number of different lending organizations, and one that I'd like to highlight today is Community Futures, because they offer a wide range of financing options for business transitions, including bridge loans and flexible payment terms. The Community Futures office will also offer additional services such as assisting your buyer with writing a business plan. Business plans are required for financing from any lender. It is important to ensure your buyer understands this, or this could hold up the transition by at least 3 months. According to CIBC World Markets, there are 510,000 Canadian businesses that are currently looking to transition in the next number of years. Due to the supply of businesses and the demand for buyers, business owners have an increasing need to become more flexible with third-party buyouts or payment terms. Many businesses, especially in the trades, actively look for a third-party buyer and then will implement their own employee share ownership plan. The one thing that I can't stress enough is make sure your buyer understands that they need a business plan. Time and time again, we have a number of people that get held up in their transition because the buyer doesn't understand that. We also have free resources on the site so that if they'd like to build a business plan, or we can recommend a organization that will be able to assist one-on-one with writing that business plan. The fifth and final stage is the actual transition. This process is between 0 and 60 months. An individual buying a business has a higher success rate than an individual starting a new business. This is primarily because the competent mentorship that is available to buyers. The majority of owners agree to stay on as a key employee contract for 6 to 12 months. This gives the opportunity for a corporate knowledge transfer. And the stats are staggering. Only 10% of startups are successful after 5 years, and 70% of people who buy a business are successful after 5 years. And that difference is definitely the mentorship. Many of us think of restaurants as a very risky business, but after working with a number of members on our site, I've come to realize that flower shops, if they don't offer mentorship periods, can also be risky. Think about it for a second. Their business has multiple business cycles throughout the calendar year. If you start a flower shop, you might not know that during February, prices from your suppliers triple. If you're a new entrepreneur and didn't know that, they might order too much and not have the cash flow to cover the cost. That's why we encourage any of our flower shop members to stay on for at least a year to help the new owner better understand the highs and lows of the Christmas season or Mother's Day rush. Now think about your own business for a second. Are there times of the year that are busier than others? What kind of corporate knowledge transfer could you help a new buyer with? And so this doesn't mean that you have to be with that person day to day in the business, but maybe you're available over the telephone for a year if they have questions about who the suppliers are or questions about what kind of product to bring in for a certain season. All right, we're going to change it up and do a little bit of an activity. So I'm going to read some questions out loud, and I want you guys to think of the answer with these 4 possibilities. Someone from their immediate family, someone you've worked with, a qualified professional, or a stranger online. Who would you most like to have a cup of coffee with? So think about that for a second. Would you rather have coffee with an immediate family member, someone that you've worked with, a qualified professional, or a stranger online? Who would you turn to for relationship advice? Who would you turn to for career advice? Who would you prefer to borrow money from? Who would you most easily confront with the difference of opinion? Now look at your list of answers that you've jotted down. Do any of these surprise you? Now I want you to think about this in terms of your transition. Oftentimes, some of us will go to our family members for advice, but what happens when they're the ones on the other side of the negotiation table that's being difficult? That's why it's important to involve and engage professionals throughout the transition. So we get a lot of questions about who should be involved. There's business consultants, accountants, lawyers, financial planners, etc. And they all have a role to play in the transition. You should not be getting your legal advice from a financial planner, and you should not be talking to a lawyer about the emotional readiness change in a transition into retirement. Throughout the webinar series, you will have access to these professionals. So I'm just going to review them, take a few seconds here and review each one. So today we're working on writing a succession plan. Then we'll have a number of people come in and talk about family transition, employee share ownership programs, and third-party sales specifically. And then emotional readiness for change. And that mentorship component is really important too. So figure out how you set up a mentorship program with your family, employee, or third party. And those HR issues before, during, and after the transition. Now, if you've got a little bit of time before you actually want to sell your business, why not see what kind of marketing you can ramp up so that you can get the best sale price on your business? Then understand the importance of a chartered business valuation. And I know this webinar is going to be extremely popular this year due to some proposed changes at the federal level for tax planning. There's also insurance strategies, legal considerations, financial planning for retirement. And if you're already working with a buyer, we encourage you to invite them to the financing for buying a farm, and then financing options for buyers, which is more focused on buying a business. And as I mentioned before, this webinar series can be accessed from the privacy of your own home or office. Each webinar is 30 minutes long, and each industry expert will share great information and answer questions directly from the audience. So one of the last learning objectives is how to get started. We've put together a program called Get Started Business and Farm Background. This is an online survey that you can fill out. Your personal and business information will be kept confidential. And a Succession Matching staff member will review the information and send you some suggestions on next steps. So for example, if you don't have any kids to pass on the business, maybe the family transition webinar isn't a good fit for you. So we'd make suggestions on webinars that may be a better fit for you to attend, some resources available to you, and also some local programming that we're aware of we can suggest throughout your succession plan. Next week is a homework week. We hope you take this time to fill out the survey and you'll receive an answer from one of our Succession Matching staff members. During this homework week, we also encourage you to work with the different succession planning professionals in your network. So for example, if you have a trusted bookkeeper or accountant that knows you and your business well, one of your next steps might be to sit down and talk to them. Or, do you know how much money you actually need to retire? Maybe one of your next steps will be booking an appointment with your financial planner. At the end of the webinar series, there will be also an optional meeting with the succession planning staff so that we can clarify any questions that you have about your succession plan after you've had an opportunity to attend all the different webinars and ask the succession planning professionals questions directly. As a business owner, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email or a message via any of our social media. If you're watching this webinar online, it's not too late to register for the continuing webinars, and please fill out the Get Started Business and Farm Background